We are holding this meeting, I think, under conditions of really a decisive turning point, one can call it that, in American and indeed world history. 2 months into the Trump administration, it's clear that that the issue is no longer if we face the threat of a political dictatorship, but how rapidly it is unfolding and whether it will be stopped. This meeting has been called specifically to oppose and denounce the seizure of Mahmoud Khalil, which took place just about 2 weeks ago on March 8th. But it's really impossible to understand this event except in relationship to its broader political context. Mahmoud was snatched from his home at Columbia University. Pregnant wife was threatened with arrest as well. He was flown to New Jersey at a detention facility, during which time neither his wife nor his lawyers were informed where he was, effectively indeed disappeared for at least a day. He was then flown to a detention center in New Orleans, where he remains. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the details of Mahmoud's case. We can discuss it as well more in the questions and answers, but he is a legal resident, that is a green card holder, a permanent resident who has all the rights associated therewith, who was seized by Trump's agents solely, and this is acknowledged by the Trump administration itself, solely because of his political positions, and in particular his opposition to the U.S.-backed genocide in Gaza, which is now entering a new stage. He has in fact not been charged. It's inappropriate to refer to him as being arrested because he has not been charged with a crime. He has been seized by immigration officials and threatened with deportation. Khalil wrote in a letter dictated to his lawyer 2 days ago from his prison in Louisiana. He wrote, "On March 8th, I was taken by DHS agents who refused to provide a warrant and accosted my wife and me as we returned from dinner. Before I knew what was happening, agents handcuffed and forced me into an unmarked car. DHS, Department of Homeland Security, would not tell me anything for hours. I did not know the cause of my arrest or if I was facing immediate deportation. At 26 Federal Plaza, I slept on the cold floor. In the early morning hours, agents transported me to another facility in Elizabeth, New Jersey. There I slept on the ground and was refused a blanket despite my request." And then he states, "My arrest was a direct consequence of exercising my right to free speech as I advocated for a free Palestine and an end to the genocide in Gaza, which resumed in full force Monday night," that is this Monday. "With January's ceasefire now broken, parents in Gaza are once again cradling two small shrouds, and families are forced to weigh starvation and displacement against bombs." Such are the actions of the Trump administration. The seizure of Khalil embodies the naked violation of the most basic democratic rights underway in the United States. Indeed, the executive branch, the White House, has become, in essence, a cockpit of a conspiracy to establish a presidential dictatorship, which I will review in the course of this report. I want to review some of the development. It is, in fact, now today, indeed, 2 months since the inauguration of Donald Trump on January 20th. It has been an extraordinary 2 months. I want to review just some of the major developments as they relate to what is clearly a very developed, conscious political operation aimed at overriding any restraints on executive power. Beginning in his first day in office, Trump signed a series of executive orders claiming vast presidential authority to override the Constitution and existing law, including an effort to repeal birthright citizenship guaranteed in the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, established and enacted after the Civil War. The declaration that non-citizens have no First Amendment rights, and an executive order that is directly related, as I'll review, to the case of Khalil. The declaration of an invasion that supposedly grants the president's power to override existing immigration law. This is explicitly stated on the grounds that there is an emergency, an invasion of immigrants entirely fictitious, that this is a military operation, and therefore the president can override existing law due to his inherent powers as commander-in-chief to respond to an invasion. The irrigation to the U.S. military of direction to counter this invasion, with in fact no geographical limits, and the preparation in these executive orders for the invocation of the Insurrection Act and the Alien Enemies Act, the latter of which, as I will review, was enacted or proclaimed by Trump this week. The first month also included the pardoning en masse of the January 6th coup participants, the creation of the Department of Government Efficiency, to which I will return, the deployment of 1,000 troops to Guantanamo to prepare for mass detention facilities, and deployment of troops to the border, which is now entering a new stage, as I will review, as well as the confirmation of Pete Hegseth, an outright fascist, as Secretary of Defense in charge of the United States military. Now, this is the executive order, which was signed by Trump on January 20th, 2 months ago today, and has been cited by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who, by the way, was confirmed unanimously by the U.S. Senate, with every single Democrat, along with Bernie Sanders, voting in favor. This is the executive order cited by Rubio as the sole basis for seizing Khalil. It is Executive Order number 1461, which states, the United States must ensure that admitted aliens and aliens otherwise already present in the United States, and this would include Khalil, green card holders, permanent residents, anyone who is not a U.S. citizen, must ensure that they, quote, do not bear hostile attitudes towards its citizens, culture, government, institutions, or founding principles, and do not advocate for aid or support designated foreign terrorists and other threats to our national security. What does this mean? Does not bear hostile attitudes towards its government. The Trump administration is currently the government of the United States. It is a statement that any immigrant loses any right to criticize the government. And what is it meant by the culture of the United States? What defines the culture? This is a statement, in effect, well, in reality, that the tens of millions of people in the United States who are not U.S. citizens, who are permanent residents, have no First Amendment rights, which is in fact a violation of the Constitution. They have full First Amendment rights. A lawsuit that was filed this past weekend by Mamadou Tall, who is a student at Cornell University, who has also been targeted, beginning under the Biden administration, for deportation. He filed a lawsuit along with a professor and another student at Cornell University against the Trump administration, arguing that these executive orders are illegal and unconstitutional. The lawsuit notes, you may not be able to read this, I will read the relevant sections. It notes the following in relationship to this executive order. It says the vast majority of the order's applications sweep up speech that is clearly protected. Under the executive order, a non-citizen may not express a hostile attitude to Congress, the Supreme Court, defendant DHS, that is the Department of Homeland Security, which is a defendant in this lawsuit, Trump or his administration's policies. Nor does it define the conception of American culture. For instance, the language of this order would appear to prescribe scholarship or speech that draws attention to more iniquitous moments in American history, like the expulsion of Native Americans, Jim Crow, and the lynching of Black Americans, Japanese internment, which is now being repeated on a even larger scale, or McCarthyism. That is to say, it prescribes any criticism of the government and its so-called culture. In the particular case of Tal, he has been arrested for deportation due to his criticism of U.S. policy in relationship to Israel. And Rubio has stated, and this is a position of the Trump administration, that those positions, opposition to the genocide in Gaza, are hostile to the United States, its government, and pernicious to the interests, the so-called national security interests of the United States. That is, the interests of American imperialism. To give a sense of the figures that are involved in determining what is the culture now of America, you have people like Pete Hegseth, referred to already, the Department of Defense Secretary, who wrote a book in which he declared, and this is called this book is called The War on Warriors, in which he says, "The left didn't fight the wars, they stayed home and wrecked our house. America wreckers." He referred to the domestic enemies, which include the radical left, Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and now Hamas supporters and other progressive stormtroopers. That is, anyone criticizes the genocide as a Hamas supporter under their interpretation. He wrote that the expectation is that we will defend America against all enemies, both foreign and domestic, real enemies. Not political opponents, but real enemies. Yes, Marxists are our enemies. And of course, if you look at the language of Trump constantly, he's denouncing the radical left lunatics, as he puts it in his very highly cultured posts on his Truth Social website. That is, in fact, underlying the attack on Khalil and others, an attack in all opposition to the policies of the ruling class from the left. Now, just to review again the developments over the past 2 months. In February, the initiation of mass firings, and I will return to this later, of federal workers and the destruction of social programs under the Department of Government Efficiency, the Orwellian named agency under the direction of the world's richest and presumably most efficient man, Elon Musk. The beginning of a collection of massive database of information, which has enormous implications for democratic rights through the DOGE agency. In essentially all government agencies, it now has access to a vast trove of information being fed through Musk's AI programs to to determine what it can cut in social programs, but also giving it power to spy on the population and gather information on every individual directly in the hands of Musk and Trump at a level not possible at any point in American history. There was also that month a meeting between Rubio and the president of El Salvador, a right-wing fascist who offered to use Salvadoran prisons to jail Americans as well as immigrants, which is now being put in practice with the deportation flights that took place this past week, which I'll come to momentarily. The executive order asserting absolute authority over independent federal agencies. The position of the Trump administration is Trump has complete control over and must have complete control over the entire apparatus of the state directly and immediately. Confirmation of Kash Patel as head of the FBI, an individual who has self-proclaimed drawn up a list of political enemies of the Trump administration for targeting. The purge of the Pentagon leadership, which is very significant as Trump seeks to establish his own personal control over the military. And then this month, the seizure of Khalil, which the White House, as I said, has justified on the basis of the executive orders enacted during Trump's first day in office, on the grounds that Khalil's presence in the United States is harmful to U.S. interests. Other students are being seized. Liki Cordia is another Columbia University student. Also just this week, I have it at the end, Badar Khan Suri, a graduate student at Georgetown University, was seized by masked DHS agents on Monday, and he is now also in Louisiana on the same grounds as the seizure of Khalil. He is argued that he's a supporter of Hamas because apparently his father-in-law, with whom he has actually no contact, was more than a decade ago an advisor to Nasrallah, one of the leaders of Hamas. And on those grounds, they've seized him for deportation as well. Columbia University has expelled, suspended, or revoked degrees from 22 students for participation in protests against the genocide. It should be actually noted that the university administrations in all of this are playing an absolutely abominable and filthy role. Administrations that are tied to the Democratic Party, which I'll get to a bit later, which have in fact facilitated. The news reports today are that Columbia University has essentially agreed to everything Trump is demanding in terms of a crackdown on so-called anti-Semitic speech in exchange for receiving federal funding, and it has fully participated. Actually, Khalil appealed to Columbia University the day before he was seized and said he was being targeted, and he was, by a right-wing Zionist professor at Columbia University who was tweeting about how he should be arrested and deported in the days before this happened. He appealed to the university to assist him and to protect him, and they did nothing. An administration which is tied, and for that matter, here at University of Michigan, the university has facilitated the arrests of students involved in protesting the genocide. Also this past week, last weekend, the invocation of the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, we'll speak about a bit more, and the defiance of a court order to stop the deportations under the act. The Trump administration has now transferred hundreds of prisoners from Venezuela primarily to El Salvador internment centers, or as one might say, forced labor concentration camps, in direct defiance of a court order. And there have been, over the past weeks, an escalating series of threats against the judge, James Boasberg, all with the most far-reaching implications. Just yesterday, I referred to Mahmoud at Cornell University, who was threatened with arrest. Apparently, there are now ICE officials roaming around Cornell University looking for Mahmoud in the days after he filed the lawsuit against Trump and his executive's orders. Most recent developments, I think I referenced, is the militarization of the border, which itself has immense implications. There's a plan to deploy the military along 60 miles of so-called buffer zone on the U.S.-Mexico border. They're transferring USS Gravely aircraft carrier to the Gulf. The enormous increase in the role of the military within the United States. Now, I want to speak specifically about the significance of the events of this past week in relationship to to Khalil. It's a separate but related, intricately related development in Trump's Operation Dictatorship, and that is the invocation of the Alien Enemies Act and the response to the judge's decision that he had to not deport anyone under this act. The Alien Enemies Act was passed in 1798 under President John Adams. In fact, it was a scar on the whole administration of John Adams because it was seen as a measure. It was part of the Alien and Sedition Acts, which were targeted at his political opponents, and particularly Thomas Jefferson. But it grants the president unchecked powers to detain or deport nationals of enemy states without due process. That is, under conditions of war, invasion. It gives the president the ability to seize and deport individuals without any judicial proceedings. It has been used only 3 times during the War of 1812 against the British, World War I, and most notoriously during World War II, to justify the mass internment of Japanese Americans and Japanese immigrants in camps throughout the United States. On the right is a notice issued by the United States government at the time, the Roosevelt administration, requiring all German, Italian, and Japanese Americans to identify themselves and get a certificate of identification. But the act was used at the time, as I said, to round up and intern Japanese immigrants and Japanese Americans as well during World War II. Of course, a notorious act, now seen as a notorious act. It is now being implemented under conditions in which there is obviously no war. In every prior case, the act was used to was in response to an actual declared war by Congress. That is, the 1812, World War I, World War II. Now it is being declared under the completely specious argument that the United States is at war with the Tren Aragua gang, which is alleged to be directed by the Venezuelan government, and that the United States is in a war. No one declared this war. No one, in fact, even knew the United States was engaged in such a war. But apparently, according to the Trump administration, there is this war going on, and therefore anyone who is said to be a member of this gang is automatically eligible for deportation on the say-so entirely of the president. Of course, who decides if they're a member of that gang? The president. And the rationale, you can read in the media, so-and-so had a tattoo, therefore he's a member of the gang, therefore he can be deported without any legal proceeding. And that is their argument. The judge in the case, Federal Judge James Boasberg, originally appointed by George Bush, I believe George W. Bush, and then by Obama, a U.S. District Court judge in D.C., made the obvious ruling that the United States is not at war with Venezuela or this gang, so the invocation of the Insurrection Act is inapplicable and invalid. And he ordered that the Trump administration, this was all happening on Saturday, that the Trump administration could not deport anyone based upon this act, and that any planes that had already taken off for deportation had to be returned back to the United States, an order which the White House simply refused to follow. And this is made very clear by the statements of White House officials. Among those who were directly involved in this decision is the fascist advisor to Trump, Stephen Miller, but Tom Homan, the so-called border czar, pictured there on the left. I'm proud to be part of this administration. We are not stopping. I don't care what the judges think. I don't care what the left thinks. We're coming. The White House press secretary declared, and it's very, very clear that this is an activist judge who is trying to usurp the president's authority under the Alien Enemies Act. The president has this power, and that's why this deportation campaign has continued. And this judge, Judge Boasberg, is a Democratic activist in terms of the actual timing, and the judge has actually demanded that the White House give it the actual timing of what happened. When did the planes leave in relationship to my order? And was there a violation of my order that they be returned? And it's obvious that there was. The order was issued at something like 7 p.m. On Saturday. The planes arrived in El Salvador somewhere around midnight. One of them hadn't even taken off before the order was made. So the White House is simply defying a judicial order by a U.S. District Court judge and saying that it will not abide by it. But what are the implications of that? It has the most profound political consequences. The White House is essentially saying the president is not bound by court rulings. It's not, as would be the case in the past, normal proceedings. The president got a court ruling that it thought was unfavorable. It would abide by it, challenge it to the Supreme Court and its gang of reactionary fascists, and hope for that they would get a favorable ruling. That is not what the White House has done. It has simply said that it will not abide by the order. Even in the capitalist media, there is now an acknowledgement that what is happening in the United States is an attempt to overthrow constitutional rule and establish a presidential dictatorship. That is, after all, the implications of the statement of the president that he is not bound by the orders and directions of the Supreme Court, or of the courts, of the judicial system. And he also, of course, has a position that he's not bound by the legislative body either. Yesterday, the New York Times published an extraordinary article under the headline "Defiance and Threats in Deportation Case Renew Fear of Constitutional Crisis," citing the comments of a number of law professors on the significance of Trump's actions. Jamal Green, a law professor at Columbia University, is quoted as stating, quote, "If anyone is being detained or removed based on the administration's assertion that it can do so without judicial review or due process, the president is asserting dictatorial power, and constitutional crisis doesn't capture the gravity of the situation." Stanford law professor Pamela Karlan is quoted as stating, "The problem with this administration is not just acute episodes like what's happening with Judge Boasberg and the Venezuelan deportation. It's a chronic disrespect for constitutional norms and for the other branches of government. Tipping point suggests," she continued, "tipping point suggests a world in which things are fine until suddenly they're not, but we're past that point already." And they also noted statements by Trump calling the judge a radical left lunatic. I mean, what actually Trump himself posted on the social media in relationship to this judge is absolutely unhinged and deranged, but it's just an expression of the character of this government. Now, Carlin, the last professor I quoted from Stanford, is right that the tipping point is an inappropriate metaphor when it's dealing more with a complete collapse of democratic forms of rule. The Trump administration is not merely acting with disrespect for constitutional norms. It is a willful criminal conspiracy to destroy them. Neither in the Times nor in the media as a whole. There's another Times article that actually I was just reading on the way over here, which is basically sort of arguing along similar lines, that it's within the framework that the actions that Trump is taking are far in excess of other authoritarian governments internationally. But neither in the Times nor in the media as a whole is there any serious analysis of how the United States got to this point. It presents Trump's actions as if they were the sudden eruption, if they suddenly erupted out of nowhere, the product of one individual's delusions, or perhaps one party's delusions or malice. But this is false. Now, I want to spend some time reviewing the background. Oops. What time do we have? Set? 7:40. I want to spend a little bit of time reviewing the background to this. I can't go into this in detail, but I think it is important to place the present government in its broader context, because the crisis of American democracy did not just arise overnight. It is now quarter century since the 2000 election, a certain turning point in American history when the Supreme Court intervened to stop the counting of ballots and hand the election to George W. Bush, who had obviously lost both the popular vote and the Electoral College. It was a theft of an election. The World Socialist website at the time wrote, and this is from December 3rd, 2000, this is in advance of the Supreme Court decision in Bush v. Gore, what the decision of this court will reveal is how far the American ruling class is prepared to go in breaking with traditional bourgeois democratic and constitutional norms. Is it prepared to sanction ballot fraud and the suppression of votes and install in the White House a candidate who has attained that office through blatantly illegal and anti-democratic methods? The outcome of that court ruling was demonstrated that, in fact, it was. And the absence of any opposition within the political establishment to the theft of the elections really demonstrated, which we explained at the time, that there did not exist a significant constituency within the political establishment for democratic forms of rule. The elections were followed by the so-called War on Terror, in which the Bush administration seized on the September 11th attacks to justify a global campaign of imperialist violence, as well as a escalating assault on democratic rights, the Patriot Act, Guantanamo Bay, torture centers. All of this was established during the Bush administration. You had the Obama administration, which institutionalized the principle of the assassination of American citizens without due process, persecuted whistleblowers who exposed NSA spying, and you had Trump's first term. There is a broad process going back now over 25 years of an extended crisis of democratic forms of rule in the United States. During Trump's first term, and it gives a bit of a indication of what is being planned in the coming months, Trump sought to invoke the Insurrection Act. I referred to the Insurrection Act in relationship to the executive orders at the beginning, that Trump had drawn up plans to invoke both the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, which he now has done, as well as the Insurrection Act. The Insurrection Act differs from the Alien Enemies Act, well, in numerous ways. It's different historical contexts, but perhaps its primary significance is it applies not just to immigrants, that is aliens, but to American citizens as well, to anyone. The Insurrection Act allows the president, if he declares an insurrection, to utilize the military against the insurrection. And that would involve the deployment of the military in streets throughout the United States. Trump sought to invoke the Insurrection Act once before in June of 2020, in and around the infamous Lafayette Square incident, as Trump's administration was responding to the protests over the police murder of George Floyd. He raised the prospect of, or he sought to invoke the Insurrection Act. At that point, there was conflict within the state, within the military, over it because of the implications for all of the domestic stability of the United States if the military was going to be deployed to crush political opposition. But he sought to do that. The World Socialist website wrote at the time, actually this is a statement of the Socialist Equality Party, he referred to statements of Trump about a movement that is taking place, and if we don't dominate it, it will only get worse. And then, of course, Trump's first term ended in the attempted coup of January 6th, which has been downplayed in general, but was an attempt to overthrow the government, spearheaded by the president to overturn an election in a fascistic coup. We wrote January 7th, the day after, the hoary glorifications of the invincibility and timelessness of American democracy have been totally exposed and discredited as a hollow political myth. The popular phrase, "it can't happen here," taken from the title of Sinclair Lewis's justly famous fictional account of the rise of American fascism, has been decisively overtaken by events. Not only can a fascist coup happen, here it has happened on the afternoon of January 6, 2021. Moreover, even if the initial effort has fallen short of its goal, it will happen again. I'm sorry, that's repeated twice. It will happen again. And I think one can argue, I mean, Trump has certainly drawn certain conclusions from the experiences of his first term, such things as making sure he has control over the military, direct control, through the appointment of people like Hegseth, as well as the shakeup which was organized last month, and is preparing to do what he failed to do on January 6th. That is a coup which is carried out by the president himself, a coup directed at the Constitution and at democratic rights. Now, what underlies this? How is this to be explained? So in media, you don't have any historical background and no real explanation. What explains? After all, time of the dissolution of the Soviet Union, they all said, well, this was the end of history, the final triumph of democracy. It was going to be the peaceful development of democracy. Now, all of a sudden, you have in the center of the the center of world capitalism, the United States, a conspiracy to overthrow democratic rights. And this is part of an internet. How is this to be explained? Well, I would say there are two interconnected processes which lie at the roots of this crisis. The first is the extraordinary concentration of wealth in the hands of a tiny oligarchy. We drew attention to this at the time of the 2000 elections and explained that what was the extreme growth of social inequality. The levels of social inequality have reached, even in the past quarter century, extraordinary heights. This is a graph of world billionaire wealth from 2005 through 2024. The total wealth on the left shows its growth from $2 trillion to over $14 trillion in the course of just 2 decades. The number of billionaires rising from just about 400 to over 2,600. You have individuals like Elon Musk, world's wealthiest person, who have personally wealth over $400 billion. Musk's wealth actually over the past 4 years has risen from something like $30 billion to over $400 billion. I mean, extraordinary concentrations of wealth in a tiny fraction of the population. And Trump's regime is openly the regime of the oligarchy. It is carrying out massive layoffs, attacks on programs like Medicaid and Social Security, the dismantling of entire government agencies, including the Department of Education. Trump signed today a new executive order ordering the dismantling of the Department of Education, which is headed by that great paragon of education and culture, Linda McMahon, the billionaire scion of world wrestling entertainment, who is seeking to set out to destroy public education itself. Everything is under assault. A ruthless class war which is being spearheaded by Musk and his various allies. In explaining the significance of Trump's re-election, back in November of last year, the WSWS wrote that it marks, quote, a violent realignment of the state to correspond with the nature of capitalist society itself. The destruction of democratic rights is aimed above all and fundamentally at the working class. The capitalist ruling elite knows that its policies are not popular. It knows that they will be met with resistance, and it is preparing accordingly. And what has it been doing as it's been waging its war on democratic rights that I referred to again? The mass firings, agencies which have anything to do with providing social services are just being dismantled. In the environment, the EPA is being dismantled. There was an announcement this week that they're tearing apart agencies that monitor the weather so that we're not even going to be able to know if there are hurricanes coming under conditions of escalating climate change. You have people like RFK Jr. and other reactionaries in charge of public health, whose position is basically let all viruses and illnesses run rampage throughout the entire population. We are going to do nothing. That is the character of this government. It is waging a ruthless war against the working class on behalf of the financial oligarchy. So that is one critical objective factor underlying the turn towards dictatorship. The second is the endless and escalating global imperialist war. The U.S. ruling class, facing internal crises and long-term economic decline, seeks an out through military aggression on a world scale. Trump has openly declared the intention to annex Canada, Greenland, Panama, echoing Hitler's fascistic ambitions. The latest developments... Oops. Oh, well, this is from World Socialist website article. We noted the prominent role of figures like Peter Thiel, Larry Ellison, as well as Musk, sort of tech oligarchs, very closely connected to cryptocurrencies, which is being promoted by Trump as well. People have made billions of dollars on the basis of speculation and parasitism. But in relationship to war, the latest developments are the escalating war in the Middle East. Trump said earlier today, or perhaps it was yesterday, he threatened the annihilation of the Houthis in Yemen, genocidal language as the U.S. is engaged in a relentless bombing campaign targeting Yemen. and the population, which has been devastated by over a decade of U.S.-backed war spearheaded by the Saudis. This is part of an escalating war throughout the Middle East, and in particular the escalation of the genocide in Gaza. And it is worth stressing the point that the seizure of Khalil and others for protesting the genocide takes place as Trump declares that it is his intention, president, to clear out the entire population of Gaza, openly proclaims a policy of ethnic cleansing, has said that it's the aim of the United States to take control of Gaza. They published on Trump's social media a video in which Trump is dreaming of building casinos and hotels on the rubble of American bombs launched by the Israeli regime. The attack on democratic rights is inextricably connected to escalating imperialist war. And I can't go into this here, but the situation in Yemen now is very much directly connected to the preparations for war against Iran, which is a major target of Trump, and behind Iran, China. Now, I would like to conclude, well, before I turn to the conclusion, address what really one cannot understand the political situation without, which is of course, the character of Trump. I would want to talk about how it's possible that this administration has come to power and how it is carrying out these actions. There are the objective factors, but objective factors are worked through political processes. And here one has to address the absolutely complicit role and collaborationist role of the Democratic Party. In the face of Trump's offensive, the Democrats have responded with a combination of complicity, collaboration, and cowardice. Let us just recall what Biden declared 2 days after the attempted coup at the end of Trump's last term, and at the beginning of Biden's term. We need a Republican Party. We need an opposition that is principled and strong. He referred several times during his remarks to his Republican friends and called for Democrats to unify with Republicans to accomplish things we have to agree on and work together on. The primary thing that Biden was referring to that they needed to agree on and work together on was war. That has been the central focus of the Democratic Party, of the Biden administration. 4 years of escalating war centered on the U.S.-NATO war against Russia, and then the genocide in Gaza itself, which the Democratic Party is responsible for. The Biden administration is guilty of arming and financing. In fact, they created the conditions for the persecution of students who were being arrested with a whole lie that opposition to the genocide was anti-Semitic. It was all under the Biden that they did that. They started sending police against protesters, arresting protesters. The slander repeated by Chuck Schumer in his interview in the New York Times this past weekend, that somehow opposition to the genocide is anti-Semitic. That's now just being utilized by Trump whole cloth to justify what he is doing, all prepared by the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party's response to the election of Trump, it was just a couple months ago that Biden welcomed Trump back to the White House, wishing him every success, offering to do, quote, everything we can to make sure you're accommodated and have what you need. He echoed Obama's infamous statement at the time of Trump's first election that the elections are merely an intramural scrimmage between two sides on the same team. You have Obama, who made those comments just a few months ago at the funeral of Jimmy Carter, yucking it up with Trump as they shared a private joke. Prior to the election, Biden and Kamala Harris warned on occasion that Trump represented an existential threat to American democracy. Indeed, even the F word, fascism, featured prominently in pre-election discourse from the Democrats and sections of the media. That was preemptively sent back into political exile as soon as Trump won the election. Harris called Trump and congratulated him, declared that she wanted a smooth transition and that they would be engaged in a peaceful transfer of power. This is the response of the Democratic Party. And I think it is critical to understand that there are two forms of opposition to the Trump administration. There is the opposition of sections of the ruling class, represented by the Democratic Party, as well as sections of the Republican Party, this is actually second here, that represent sections of the ruling class. This is from a World Socialist website article we wrote after Trump's fascist diatribe earlier this month before Congress. We wrote, the Democratic Party speaks for the opposition of sections of the ruling class. It supports Trump and the Republicans' reactionary social policies. Its aim is to channel popular anger into support for its own reactionary agenda, which is centered above all on war. Alyssa Slotkin, the congressman from here in Michigan, I believe she's planning on running for senator, gave the official Democratic Party response to Trump's, or is she senator now? No, she is senator now. Sorry, these people are such political titans that I have sometimes difficulty remembering where they are. She is now senator. She gave the official response, which she declared that at one point Reagan would be rolling in his grave if he heard Trump's speech. Her model was, she said, she was a Cold War kid, and Reagan would she would far prefer Reagan as president than Donald Trump. Why? Because Reagan was waging an aggressive campaign against Russia. And that was the focal point of the Democratic Party's criticism. So there is the opposition of the Democratic Party. There will be conflicts within the state as this develops. There will be opposition which emerges within the state, the Democratic Party issuing various criticism. It's always critical to understand that that opposition is the opposition of a section of the ruling class, motivated by concern over issues related particularly to foreign policy, terrified of the growth of opposition from below, and is totally distinct from and antagonistic to the opposition in the working class. And there is growing opposition to the attacks on social programs, the destruction of democratic rights, the escalating war. Opposition in the working class will grow. Just a word on Bernie Sanders, since Sanders at University of Michigan, did he come here? He would know. He was in Warren. He's been going around. Yeah, 2 years ago. But I just recently, a couple weeks ago, he was in Warren. He's been giving a tour. He's been resurrecting his denunciation of the billionaire oligarchs and other things, and political revolution. It's worth recalling what he was just saying several months ago. First of all, he was declaring that the Biden administration was the most progressive administration in Democratic Party history since FDR. Complete lie. And then actually his own response to Trump's election was pledges of collaboration, in which he made such absurd statements as that he looked forward to working with President Trump when he stands with the working families of this country, as if the Trump government would be standing with the working class on anything. Very deliberate on Sanders' part. We can perhaps discuss this further. But he is an absolute political operator who is very conscious that his aim and role is to channel opposition behind the Democratic Party. I'll skip over that. And just this past last week, the Democratic Party passed Trump's budget, funding the government. It, in fact, had the opportunity to shut down the government by refusing to pass a spending bill, which removed any legislative restraints on the actions of the White House. And it didn't. After the intervention of particularly Chuck Schumer, the senator from Wall Street, the Democrats ensured passage of the budget bill and allowed, in fact, Trump to do now what he is doing, finance the government to carry out the actions that it is now carrying out. And they did it very deliberately. We wrote March 14th, 1 week ago, it is impossible to explain the actions of the Democratic Party purely in terms of cowardice. The Democrats are not an opposition party. They agree with the essential elements of Trump's social and domestic policy. The differences that exist are largely tactical, not fundamental, focused primarily on foreign policy, where the Democrats favor continued escalation of the war in Ukraine. Actually, the statement by Slotkin could hardly be clearer on this question. Reagan is the ideal. Yes, go after social programs, destroy the conditions of workers. Yes, we want you to do that. We support that. She, in fact, said before, if you want to cut waste, which is, their code word for slashing programs, I agree with you and I'll help you do it. Just do it in a responsible way. But on the question of Russia, on the war, that's where we differ. That's the Democratic Party. Hey. And why do they do this? Because they, despite their tactical differences, they represent the same capitalist oligarchy as Trump. They fear mass opposition from below far more than they fear a Trump dictatorship. And they are, in fact, collaborating in the assault on democratic rights, the assault on students. I referenced the role of university administrations, the role of the Biden administration, the Michigan governor who's been prosecuting students here at Nessel, the Michigan attorney who's been called in to prosecute students at the University of Michigan. This is the Democratic Party. So what has to be done? There has to be opposition. There has to be the development of opposition in the working class. The working class must intervene in the situation. Opposition to the seizure of Khalil and other students cannot be left to students and contained to the campuses alone. The fight to free Mahmoud is inseparable from the broader fight against dictatorship and imperialist war. And the social force that can oppose it is the working class. The only genuine, the defense of democratic rights can be genuinely defended only through mobilizing the immense social force of the American and international working class. And so the fight has to be taken into the working class. It is the working class that is the target of the attacks. It is the target of all the attacks of the social programs, on the mass layoffs, the attacks on Social Security, Medicare, healthcare programs, and it is the real constituency for the defense of democratic rights. And there have been, in the past 2 months, significant demonstrations that have begun to erupt. You see also in town hall meetings, anger. I mean, the policies of Trump are not popular, including among those who voted for Trump. 70 million people did not vote for Trump because they want to see Social Security cut or food stamps cut, Medicaid cut, or that they want a fascist dictatorship. They voted for Trump in large part because the Democratic Party is a thoroughly reactionary and rotten party of Wall Street and the upper middle class. And Trump is able to exploit social discontent. But as the reality of this administration is felt, and it is being felt, there will be growing opposition, and that has to be mobilized. I just wanted to play, if I could, brief video. Interviews with workers that we conducted at Dana Auto Parts plant just outside of Detroit. I think it gives a sense of the sentiment among the working class more broadly. This is on Khalil. Actually, it was interesting. The Dana workers, these are young workers at an auto parts plant. They told our reporters that they were actually talking about the fact that Khalil, who's, by the way, a member of the United Auto Workers, had been arrested. They were talking about him in their lunch break. But we went and we spoke to the workers, and this is some of the things that they said.
So what do you think about the kidnapping of Mahmoud Khalil and their threat to deport him?
Well, obviously, it's bullshit. The fact that they're going to try to deport him for what he's saying goes against what America is all about. If you want to deport him for that, you are a traitor to America, in my opinion. The next step is getting rid of collective bargaining. They don't want us to be able to band together. Black people, white people, brown people, all of us are in the same boat. We all are laborers. We all workers. They don't want us to be able to band together, and that's our only power against corporations, against billionaires, or against anyone that wants to use the United States government to deport people who disagree with them.
Free Mahmoud. This is so messed up. Every UAW member needs to go on strike and protest. I don't know what's with Trump. At this point, get rid of him. Everyone in the Oval Office. Complete restart.
He is a dictator. I hate what he doing to everybody. Everybody is equal. Everybody is one. We all human beings. We all eat and the same. So we should all get treated the same and fairly. To me, it's not fair. Part of the Constitution, everybody got free speech. Why would when he say something, it's cool, but when we say something, they want to deport people.
I think that gives a sense of the sentiment of workers in this country. And a deep, actually, democratic sentiment. I mean, when they say he's a traitor, as Work says, he's a traitor to America, I mean, they're not talking about the America of the oligarchs. They're talking about the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, democratic principles, which are deeply rooted in the working class. There is that sentiment. I think, actually, the first workers, the profound class sense, you know, what they do to him, the deportation, they're going to take away collective bargaining. They're going to take away our ability to take collective action. This is directed at them. Now, there's an understanding of that. And that has to be developed. That is the social force. There has to be a turn to the working class. There has to be opposition in the working class. So the situation is urgent. It is critical that this social force be mobilized, that workers be alerted to what is happening, and that there be a coordinated offensive. It cannot remain on the campuses, opposition. There has to be demonstrations, strikes, protests in every workplace, in every neighborhood against the Trump's drive toward dictatorship. That is a social force. We call for the formation of rank-and-file committees throughout the working class. We urge students to take this battle into the working class, go out to the plants like we did at Dana. This should be done at every workplace in America. Or there should be distributions, leaflets going out, specifically on Khalil, who's a member of the UAW, who should go to every single auto plant in the Detroit area, talking to workers about what is happening. After all, the UAW apparatus is doing nothing. They're not defending a member of their own organization. They're sitting around trying to work with Trump. The working class has to take this up, not just auto workers, but every section of the working class. The fight to defend figures like Khalil, Mahmoud, all those who are being arrested and deported, that has to be developed as a working class movement, and it has to be developed as a movement against capitalism. The Trump administration is an expression of the putrescence, it's the filth which has been spewed out by capitalism, the oligarchy, under conditions of a death knell. It's intense and existential crisis. The fight against this government has to be developed as a movement against the social system that produced it. That is what the Socialist Equality Party is fighting to do. All right, if I can go back. That's what we're fighting to do, and we urge you to join. If you're not already a member, right, I'm not sure how many of you are already members of this SEP. Some are members of the IYSSE. If you're already a member of the IYSSE, we should really organize here at the University of Michigan to go out to the plants, to organize delegations, get other students out. And if you're not a member of the SEP, now's the time to join, and we can discuss what is involved in joining the Socialist Equality Party, because this is the time now that a real fight has to be waged. Thank you.